Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is David Greenwood. David is a serial entrepreneur, speaker, and author. He is the author, his first book was Overcoming Distraction, Thriving with Adult ADHD, and his second book is Overcoming Burnout, Real Life Strategies and Solutions for Burnout Recovery and Prevention. David, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here for this conversation today.
Yeah, I'm very interested in discussing this with you, obviously, because this is part of your area as well. So thank you. And it's obviously an important and timely discussion. So, yeah.
Well, it certainly is. The topic of burnout is something we hear a lot about. And it's something that in some industries in particular, healthcare and hospitals come to mind immediately. This is really something that is rampant in those industries. So today we want to just explore a little bit about what this is all about, the research that you did for your book and what you learned in that research, and how we look at burnout, not as a personal failure, but how we look at how it impacts individuals. So I'm curious, David, how is it that you came to write a book about burnout?
I think obviously all of us went through those COVID years. And in the beginning, I think it was scary for everybody. But, I'm running a business. I was running it out of my house anyways. But then I have a kid who was in a new school and abruptly learning at the dining room table. Again, I'm running a business. There's so many unknowns. I'm also, I think, as you know, was in the public relations and marketing industry. And if anybody spent, any time on that, they know that it literally changes by the month. So the public relations industry is fundamentally different from when I started my agency back in 2005 and before that, because of social media and digital platforms and what have you. So I was constantly having to pivot and keep up with the times. But it came about probably this time last year when I was just exhausted. I'm mentally exhausted. I can't think. I'm getting physically exhausted. Now, I'm an adult with ADD. That's why I wrote the first book. And so you have to take a look and say, am I just having trouble with ADD or executive functions? Is it just the times or is it something deeper? But I was casually saying to myself, man, I'm burnt out. It's just like that casual thing. But when I really just kind of sat down and looked at it, and like anybody does, you hop online. I'm like, no, I'm burnt out. I have some telltale signs of burnout. And I need to look into this further. So when I actually did, like anybody does, you hop on Amazon, you look for books or other resources, and I couldn't find anything that really I would want to read. There were some books about research and what have you. And don't get me wrong, there's other books on there. But I wanted kind of a street smart glimpse and approach to looking at burnout, looking at the causes, as well as how to recover from burnout and kind of prevent it from happening again. So that's when I said, as a writer, I need to kind of look into this. So I brought not only my personal stories, but the stories of others into the book.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for being willing to share that this came from a very personal journey. So I really appreciate that.
Of course,
and
yeah.
What's always so interesting for me in talking with people about these kinds of topics is how many people have had this journey, that this is not that, quite honestly, it's not that unusual to hear about people. And I have my own experiences, some early in my career, and then some later in my career when I was a burnt out road warrior and traveling, 100% of the time for 2 years. Yeah, it's these stories are not that uncommon as we're discovering.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we can get into it, that um, some people actually don't recognize it, or they just think that's just the way I've chosen to live, or that's just the way that um, life is going to be working for this employer, and I got to suck it up. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a little harder when you work for yourself, right? So,
Well, yeah, and that's a whole nother animal as well. Yeah. So, and there are some commonalities, but I mean, yeah, you work for yourself. So, and as you mentioned, there's healthcare, there's teachers, there's caregiver burnout,
mhm.
and they can all lump in as burnout, but also there's differences. I had a former CEO of a hospital ask me for my book, and I'm like, you can look at it, but it doesn't really address healthcare burnout because, as an ER doctor or a nurse, especially during the past 2 years, you can't just walk away. I know some have. They've said, I just can't do this anymore. But in the thick of it, it's just a little different, and that's something I actually do want to address. So
Mm.
yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this. So I know that you did a lot of interviews for your book, and I'm curious, what was it? What did you learn about burnout from those interviews? What were those stories like?
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest takeaways are that this is far more complex than people realize.
Mm.
And it is not an Instagrammable moment. Okay, let's put it that way. I think we see on social media, we see these posts about, oh, 4 ways to solve burnout. Drink some water, go to yoga, take your vacation time. But I think, when I really got time to talk to these people and dig in, everybody's burnout story, while there were commonalities, every burnout story was different. There was everything from, I was working too hard, or I was driving myself, or I wanted to win that award, to other things such as past traumas
Mm.
that people brought from their childhood, believe it or not, into their adult life and into their work. And there was some unpacking that these people needed to do, with a professional like a therapist, for example,
Mhm.
to resolve, because you brought some of these lifelong habits into your adult life, like people pleasing and the inability to say no. And your boss says you got to work 80 hours and you say fine, whatever. So I think it's a lot more complex in getting to burnout, as well as complex in getting out of burnout. The
Mm.
other thing that I think that people need to understand, and I got a lot of tough love writing this book, which was fine because I think I needed it, but you are the co-founder of your burnout. And I think people need to understand that. I think a lot of people blame the employer or the organization, and there's certainly some blame there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you work with companies, that's what you do.
Mm.
Um, but I think that people need to understand that there are certain habits that they
Mm.
have in their work habits, as well as their personal life, that have contributed to that burnout. And I know we talk about the great resignation, but if you just say, what, I'm not going to work for this company more because I'm burned out, and then you go and bring the same habits to a new company, guess what's going to
Right.
happen?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so those are kind of the two takeaways: is that A, it's more complex than
Yeah.
people think, and B, you did contribute to it in some way.
So I love that term. You're the co-founder of your burnout.
Yeah.
That's really an interesting way to state it. So I'm curious, were there any other themes or, so you talk about some of these are habits and things that, we possess. So
Yeah.
what were some of those themes that you really heard in those interviews?
I would classify most people I interviewed as a high achiever.
Mm.
So they definitely were driven to succeed. At one time, they loved their career. They
Mm.
loved the place they worked at. They had a passion for it.
Mm.
But something happened, and it drove them into burnout. And again, that's why I say you kind of co-founded your burnout is that you wanted to do a good job. Maybe you found a company that you really loved at the time, but the circumstances continued to to drive this burnout. So I would classify everybody as somewhat of a high achiever.
Mm.
The other thing is boundaries. Pretty much everybody I interviewed had some challenge with setting the necessary boundaries in their own life to to not let your professional life ruin your personal life.
Yeah.
So if your employer said you got to go fly to another country, okay, fine. Or you got to work 3 nights a week, or you got to answer all the phones, or it's wedding season, so it's 80 hours a week, take it or leave it, versus saying, no, that's not what I signed up for. So I think a lot of people had the inability to actually set their boundaries. And I think the other thing that I learned is the boundaries is also understanding your own capacity. So boundaries with yourself, willing what you're not only going to tolerate with your career, but with yourself. So, and I think that's a major challenge and something that people really need to look at. Two other things, a misalignment of values, whether you understood you had values or not. Okay, whether you actually sat down and said, these are my values, or whether you just didn't have them in writing, there was a misalignment of values and there was a lack of purpose in what you were doing. And some internal struggle was going on with these people saying, this isn't me.
Can you give me an example of what that, what's that misalignment like? How does that manifest?
I think there was, I'll take me for an example. One little example is that, and I alluded to it at the beginning, is that I was in the public relations business. I was what they call a media relations professional, where I would put CEOs on TV and get them quoted in major newspapers. I would ghostwrite articles for business magazines, that type of thing. But when I could march a CEO into a TV studio and they talked for 5 minutes, boom, I was worth not only what I charged them, but I felt that what I was doing was creating purpose. I was helping that company move things forward. Now, where PR is basically just social media, I found a lack of purpose. I know we all live in social media. This will be on social media, but it didn't feed the same beast as me earning a CEO and an organization the credibility by being on, say, a major television station.
Okay.
I think another quick example is that, I interviewed a journalist, a great journalist. And again, these are kind of connected, but, as the digital world took over traditional media, the television and radio and TV and newspaper business needed to evolve. So it was all about getting clicks and all about, read this, flashy headlines and stuff like that. And he didn't feel that his personal values of being a really dedicated journalist were being reflected in his career, because he was out there just getting clicks for the TV station. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good example. Thank you.
Yeah.
And sorry, I think I interrupted you. Did you have a third point on?
I think the only other thing really quick is this: people working too hard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're working too hard. There's a talent acquisition professional from the United Kingdom who, I mean, she admitted she was working day and night. And for the HR people watching, where, they probably understand this, is that, you're filling a position for a company that hired you to fill a position. So you're not only, racing against maybe another recruiting firm that has the same job that they're trying to fill, but you're trying to prep the candidate, and she was working day and night. And she did this for 2 years. And it finally caught up with her. But she admitted to saying that she was working too hard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
The stories that I find are most moving in some ways are the ones, but also the saddest stories, I think, are the ones where somebody ends up having this massive health crisis.
Yeah.
Whether it's, pure physical exhaustion, depression, heart attack, whatever it is,
Yeah.
where people are literally just like working themselves to death. And those are the stories that really, make me sad in some ways, because we shouldn't have to nearly work ourselves to death before we get the message that something's not right here.
Right. And I and I had this feeling when I clicked send to the publisher for my first book. I'm like, I just told the entire world I have ADD. But it was the same feeling this time when I published this book, is that, did I go too hard on these stories? And I wrote it that way because I want people to understand that this is what can happen. There are people in my book that have heart attacks, miscarriages, digestive issues that no doctor in the country could identify. And when these people finally figured out that they were burned out, life changed. But you were absolutely right, is that a lot of people who burn out just let it go until it's too far. And I wanted to let people understand that this is how bad it can get. I'm not meant to scare you. And I say it several times in the beginning of the book. If you need to put this down, put it down. But I need you to pick it up, because I need you to understand what can happen.
Yeah. Well, that's so important, and such an important message. And thank you for being the person to put it out there that, yes, you do have to say stop.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this in the context of the workplace.
Yeah.
As you know, I do a lot of work with employers, and what can employers do? Let's look at the role that the employer can play, because this isn't just about the individual. It's about what happens in the workplace. So what role can the employers play in helping to prevent burnout in their workplaces?
I think, first of all, they need to want to prevent it. I mean, they need to be dedicated to understanding that this can be a problem, and they need to, like I say, look for somebody like yourself to get in there and analyze if there are things that are causing people to burn out, if there's a culture, if there's values problems, if everything that you do. But they need to want to prevent it. I still run my marketing business to some extent, and I have a long-term client who was a collection agency. And I've been working with them for a long time. But these 4 owners really, from day one, understood that they need to take care of their people. They are in a very high pressure industry. Sometimes their people are being abused, by consumers. So they needed to do everything they could to make sure that they were taking care of people, of course, as well as retaining talent. But I mean, you can't just churn through people in a high pressure industry like that. So they knew from day one, when they opened their doors, that they needed to develop a culture and an environment where this was not going to happen. So they need to want to prevent it. I think the other thing is that they need to lead by example. I think the C-suite, I think management needs to lead by example, because if you're the manager and you take your laptop on vacation all the time and you're there when employees show up and you're there when they leave, that's not a good example. I understand there are certain industries where maybe it's a seasonal business, like a moving company, where that's just part of the territory, where you're going to be there 15 hours a day for, X number of months. But I think some managers, some people in the C-suite think leading by example is working their butts off, and it's not. It's not. You need to show people that this is a place where you can build a career, and a healthy career. So I also think it's important that they work together with both management, C-suite, and employees. I don't think it's a big problem to put everybody in the same room and have a discussion about this, or maybe several discussions. How can we improve the culture of this organization? How can we ensure that you can build a career here where your professional life can support your personal life and not the other way around. So I think they need to work together. Something you and I talked about, and I know enough about this to be dangerous, but psychological safety is key. If you are bringing ideas to the table and they're either discounted or laughed at, you're going to burn out. And I'll go back to my ADHD kind of mode, is that people who have ADHD or, other, neurodiverse brains bring a ton of ideas into an organization. And if that person is constantly just brushed off or discounted, they're going to get angry, they're going to get resentful, and they're going to leave. So, and that goes for anybody neurodivergent or not. So,
well, those are good suggestions. Thank
you.
you.
And I think the other bottom line, just real quick, somebody said this in the book, there's no winners in burnout. You may have somebody that is great at their job, great at their career, but if you burn them out, they not only will leave, but they may leave the career altogether and have to go find something else because they are so burnt out. And on the employer side, we know how much it costs to recruit and retain talent and do that over and over again. So there's no winners when it comes to this issue.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to think about it. I'm curious whether you sense that there is some stigma associated with burnout, where people aren't willing to admit it or talk about it because they feel like it's a personal failure.
I think so. Yeah. I think there's a clear stigma. It's an unknown, like they don't feel comfortable maybe bring it up to their employer, where I'm being overworked, or there's too much to this job, or interestingly enough, there were only 2 men in the book. And I don't know whether that
2 other than you, or you're one of the 2.
Yeah, two other than me. So yeah, 3 guys. Guys. The rest are women. So I don't know if that tells you something. I mean, there's a little bit in the book, and I discussed this with Diane Wingert, who's a coach for professional women. She was also a therapist in her former life. But we talk about how women are brought up to be the caregiver and to make sure the family is fed and clothed and the beds are made and all that stuff. And I think there is probably something to that. Again, I'm a white dude from Boston. I know enough about this. Okay, so I won't claim to be an expert in that, but I think that just goes to show you that there was a little bit of stigma and a little bit of hesitancy to actually verbalize this. Yeah,
I was afraid of that. What advice do you have for individuals who feel that they might be experiencing burnout?
I think you need to be brutally honest with yourself. And you mentioned the stigma, but is there a stigma with yourself? I think you need to be brutally honest that you need to address this, that you can't live like this forever. You need to take inventory of the things I'm doing that are contributing to this. I think you just need to put it all out on the table for yourself. I also think it's important in the beginning, just talk to somebody. If it's your spouse, if it's your parents, if it's just a close friend. As you mentioned, a lot of organizations have an EAP where it's a safe space to talk about this. But keeping it inside you is going to give you that heart attack. It's going to give you those digestive issues. It's going to, I'm sure people have said this, seen this book before, but I'm trying to get through the whole thing as we speak. But the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Okay. And the title of that book is spot on, because it is true that if you let this fester long enough, you're going to get headaches, your neck's going to hurt, your diet, all these things that are directly related to burnout. It's important, I think, to just talk to somebody, just start the conversation. So,
excellent advice.
Yeah, I think it's also important to hit the pause button We learn in driver's ed to not slam on the brakes because the car is going to go out of control, but I think we need to learn how to hit the pause button, just slow it down a little bit. And in doing so, understand your kind of triggers, what's causing you to feel this way. And again, that's either talking with somebody, taking a hard look at what you're doing. Yeah, you know what? I can't say no to my boss. I'm still working 7 hours a week. Yeah, I'm doing this. Self-care. It's important. I don't care. You can go to the gym or take a walk for an hour. Nobody's going to miss you. So you're just not. They don't know if you're on a phone call or a meeting. You can disappear for an hour. So as hard as it may be for you in the moment, I think people need to understand that self-care is hugely important. And then I think there's several other things, but I think you need to ask yourself, can I stay? Do I want to stay? Can my situation be fixed, or do I need to burn the boats? So, and that again is through a therapist, a burnout coach, a close friend, somebody that can kind of maybe help you navigate these issues. So,
really good advice. Yes,
yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
If our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where can they find you, David?
Just real quick, I have a quick landing page and I'm building out the website, but at overcomingburnout.net. So overcomingburnout.net. And I'm building more content on that website, but it's just a quick synopsis of the book and then a link to Amazon where people can buy it.
That's great. So yes, your book is available on Amazon. Highly recommend it, and really, learn about what other people's experiences are so you don't have to experience it.
Yeah.
So David, as always, it's always wonderful to spend time with you. I'm so grateful for your taking the time to write this book, for your contribution to not just your own well-being, but the well-being of others, and all the great work that you're doing.
Great. It's always good to hang out with you, Mari.
All right. Thanks so much, David.